Hello everyone, my name is Christian, welcome to my hobby vlog. Oh my god, we're finally here. We are doing the first Vinegar Syndrome October 2022 subscription package review number 1. I am so excited for this one. I apologize for how late this video is, or just the reviews in general of how late they are. They're over a month late. I'm usually pretty good about getting them on time, but Spooktober happened, and I did not really want to lose the momentum that I had, because I ended up watching 91 movies, as I've said before. But this is a movie that I did watch over Spooktober. I did not count it in terms of the 31 days for the videos, but I thought I needed some time for this one, because there's a whole lot that I wanted to really talk about. And this is a movie that I actually never watched until this release, because I did not want to see it until the 4K release of this, that Vinegar Syndrome had announced a year ago, half a year ago, I don't know. But this is one that everybody, I think, rightly should own. I think this is the definitive edition and release of this. There's no way that they can make this better, except for one point, which I will discuss later. But I'm going to go ahead and warn everybody that this is going to be a long one. This is the most notes I've ever written for anything. The most notes I've written, even when you put in the Withering Watch Pile episodes, where I'm making notes about 3 different movies. This one's longer. And what am I talking about today that warrants such length? None other than Tobe Hooper's masterpiece, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Obviously, I was going to love this movie. I'm going to go ahead and just talk about initial reactions. I fucking love this movie. I love the original one just as much. I'm sure there are people who want to know, which one do I prefer? Neither. I think it depends on my mood. They're both perfect 5 out of 5s for me. Especially the first one. I think that one has such an air of madness and macabre and just insanity from beginning to end. Part 2 is exactly the same way for me, except there's humor in it. So if I'm just not feeling well, I need something funny, I will watch this, part 2. If I just want to watch a really great, perfect horror film, I will watch the first part. Both of them are about an hour and a half long. I believe that part 2 is a little bit longer because they had a bigger budget than the original, at 101 minutes, which is a bit of a detriment, in my opinion, that this movie is as short as it is, because originally it was about 9 minutes longer or so, but I will talk about that later, because I have a structure for once when doing this review. So initial reactions. I love the family in this movie probably more than I do in the original one. I love Leatherface in the original one. I love the sort of kind of the subversion of the villain of Leatherface, where he's not this super aware person. He's very childlike. There's that scene where he's looking out the window, which one of the commentaries on this release talk about. And it's like he's waiting for his parents to come home after receiving a very bad report card. I know that stress. I know the absolute pressures and stresses that results in. I have no idea how, I have no really connection to Leatherface's experiences in life, but when it comes to the scariness and just the unpredictability of Leatherface, I think he's better in the original one in that regard. But as a whole, the Sawyer family, as they are called in the sequel, they are more terrifying in the original one. We also have the Hitchhiker. I think that is probably the best introduction to a villain slash villain group or group of villains in any movie ever. I love the Hitchhiker, which I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head, but the original one is a certified classic with how terrifying it is. I think it's the Hitchhiker especially, who is absolutely terrifying because he speaks. Leatherface does not speak. Grandpa does not speak. The Hitchhiker speaks, and so does the father, or who's actually supposed to be the brother of the Hitchhiker and also Leatherface. And that character, who was played by Jim Cito, the brother character, I think he isn't really given. Again, this is a perfect movie, but I wanted more of his character, and he is really the star villain, in my opinion, with the sequel. I absolutely love that character in the sequel. In the original one, it wasn't until I listened to the audio commentary track with Tobe Hooper, not physically with him, but Tobe Hooper giving the commentary. I really did not give any attention to Jim Cito's character until that or the commentary where Tobe Hooper was basically like, yeah, this character knows he's doing wrong. He's very kind of restrictive of himself and taking part in the horrific violence that is going on throughout this movie. And it's not really until Grandpa grabs the hammer and starts going that Jim Cito's character starts partaking in sort of the torture of Marilyn Burns. And this is why I love the family a little bit more in the part 2. Because part 2, all of them have a ton of time. All of them are memorable. All of them have very great actors. Leatherface is basically in a coming-of-age story. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but it should be noted that I love the original one a lot. But the family aspect I thought was a bit lacking. And another great part of the original one is sort of the creeping dread that starts right off the bat. We get the image of a corpse at a graveyard, I believe, and the sheriffs are talking about how, another corpse got dug up. We don't know where it went. And then we see our main group of characters riding in the van, and they're all hippies and, loving life, smoking weed. And they pick up the hitchhiker because nothing can go wrong. And he ends up being an absolute maniac. And this is why I love the introduction of him, because I don't know what the actor did to prepare for that role. He did not obviously become a huge horror icon after the movie. He's very much kind of centralized in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1. Not in the second one either, which is a bit sad, but instead we get a really great performance by Bill Moseley, playing the twin brother of the stranger, or the hitchhiker, as I call him. I love Jim Cito's little arc that he has when Marilyn Burns escapes and runs to his gas station. I think that is probably the most off-putting parts, because he is such a nice-looking man. He is... When I was watching the interviews for part 1 on this... I can't even reach it, but I have a really shitty old Steelbook DVD of the original one. And there's a making-of documentary where they talk to Jim Cito, and he is probably one of the most kindest people ever. And he's playing this absolute maniac. And I remember the first time I saw Texas Chainsaw 1, I was like, oh my god, like finally there's a nice person here for our character to run to, and he's going to let her go and call the cops, and it's going to be like House of a Thousand Corpses, or even The Devil's Rejects, where they finally fight back and kill off some of the family. No, he is part of them, and he is terrifying because he knows what he's doing is bad. But he gives in to that temptation of evil and hyper violence, or what do they call it? Ultra violence. And I love his appearance before that scene. And he captures Marilyn Burns in his truck, drives her over, and it is an absolute descent into madness, which is a theme throughout every single Tobe Hooper movie. Characters show up to a normal looking place, and this is kind of something that I'll just talk about now, which is the concept of the bad place, which was something that a critic of horror pointed out that was a consistent theme through a lot of horror films, and especially Tobe Hooper's, because Tobe Hooper's films always take place in a normal or standard sort of location or setting. And what the dark place is sort of a location that is sort of adjacent or under the normal setting. So think of Poltergeist, where the indigenous graveyard is underneath the suburban home. We have the fun house, where there's actually networks of all these different tunnels, and that comes back in this film, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and it's also prevalent in Texas Massacre 1. I'm sure you can think of other examples in Hooper's works, but that is something that I love about Tobe Hooper. I love everything seems great. Everyone is walking around, they're having fun at the carnival, such as in Funhouse. They're having fun riding their bikes in Poltergeist, and in the original Texas Chainsaw, they are looking at a relative's house to sell it, or maybe eventually renovate it and live in it, who knows. But they get captured and descended to madness in a very similar type of setting. And this is sort of a theme that I love about Tobe Hooper films. I think this is something that I also love a lot about the film Hereditary, where the horror comes from within the house. And this is something that I think 70s horror really nails. Rosemary's Baby, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1. I'm trying to think another. The Changeling is one that I think is a really great one. Exorcist. I mean, I could go on all day if I actually prepared and wrote a long list of all the different type of horror films that have the other place, or the bad place, or the terrible place, as the commentary talked about. And it's something that I think more films should do, and I am seeing kind of a resurgence of that, especially starting with the film Hereditary, which we're not going to talk about too much today. But that's sort of my thoughts on the original one and the family, kind of just giving some context to that. Another thing I really love about Part 2 is the makeup. Tom Savini is the makeup artist in this film. One thing that everybody should know about him, and why his makeup is so well done, is the fact that he was a war photographer for the Vietnam War. He says in the interview on this release, which I'll talk about in more depth, or at least give more context of later, one thing that he mentions in that interview, and in a lot of interviews, is that, why do my makeup look so good? Because I've seen it. And he's very blunt about that, pretty open about it, how he saw many, many terrible things, and he was in charge of photographing it and filming it, in terms of the bodies and sort of the mutilations that they found in Vietnam. And it's very sick, but I think it's sort of the best compartmentalization that could happen in terms of the horrific experiences that the veterans and also everybody who was caught up in the war. Tom Savini really lucked out, I think, and how he was able to kind of tackle with that history that he had in Vietnam. and being able to take those experiences and make something sort of positive about it, and not uh, being completely torn down mentally and in terms of his sanity, because that's what happened a lot. That's why PTSD is such a major issue, because these are things that are really hard to address. And I think Tom Savini was absolutely lucky that he was able to do something with it and be able to continue thriving, because so many people did not. And it's something that I really am kind of amazed by. I think I would have been. I don't know. I'm not even going to try and uh, anticipate, but that's why he is such a great makeup artist, is that he's seen it, so he's able to replicate what he sees. And that's why in Day of the Dead, I think, is his magnum opus. This movie is up there, in my opinion. It is so nauseating. All of the blood effects, the amputations, the sort of scarring that each of these characters have, especially with Bill Moseley and his metal plate on his head that came from the Vietnam War. It's so nasty. And there's that sequence about halfway through the movie where Caroline Williams falls into the pit or whatever of the underground system, where the Sawyer family is cooking all of the people in and shipping it out in the sausage competitions, hot dog competitions. Really funny. There's a part where Leatherface puts the freshly degloved, basically skinned face of RJ. I can't remember his LJ. Of the face of LJ, and puts it on Caroline Williams, and she says, "Oh, it's wet," and it is so fucking disgusting. This movie made me a bit nauseated the first time I saw this, because I'd never seen it before this release, and I'm happy to say that I absolutely love this movie. Again, the effects are absolutely amazing in this movie. I love them a lot. It definitely results in some really great humor, especially with when Grandpa has his makeup on. Which Tom Savini worked forever on, and asked Tobe Hooper, "Hey, can we get a close up, like a severe close up?" And Tobe Hooper was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" And we have one of the best shots of the movie where it keeps zooming in on Grandpa to the point where his nose is like covering like this much of the screen, like half of the screen, and he's just cackling, and he has all this scarring, he has pimples, he has zits, like all this terrible, not terrible, but all this sort of body horror type of stuff. And it is so sickening, and I'm really happy that Tobe Hooper was like, "Yeah, Tom Savini, you're the master. I will do a full close-up of that makeup." And it is absolutely glorious. I love it. I'm really happy that he's continuing to do makeup in films. I know he did the main design of oh my god, what's his name? Ethan Hawke's character in The Black Phone, I believe it's called. I haven't seen it yet. One day I will. But now that I know that he did the makeup for that movie, because he talks about it on this interview, I think I'll try and watch it. But one thing that I really love too about this movie, and especially the original one, is just how quick this movie feels. Or both of those movies feel, because they're both about an hour and a half to an hour and 40 minutes. And I think the original is exactly an hour and a half, and this one is an hour and 40, whatever I said earlier. And this, both of them just don't feel the length at all. They feel like 30 minutes. They are so well paced, very well edited, and there's never a shot that feels like a waste. And there are so many shots in the original one too that are great. Everybody knows the amazing low shot that is following Marilyn Burns as she's walking up to the house, and slowly the house becomes like an overbearing presence to sort of foreshadow kind of what this house is, which is the abode of a cannibal family. It's absolutely amazing. I love that film. I love that shot especially, and that was a shot that they didn't even plan. The camera operator showed up and was like, "Hey, Tobe Hooper, can we do this?" And Tobe Hooper was like, "Oh my god, that is such a good idea. We need to somehow pull this off, like in the first shot or the first take." And I think they did maybe 2 or 3 more takes after that, because they talked about it on the commentary for the original with Tobe Hooper. And they nailed it, I think, on the second take. And it is a very memorable shot. Rob Zombie has copied it, I think, 3 times now. And for good reason. It's a really great shot. And everything in this movie and in the sequel, there's not a minute to waste, in my opinion. There's nothing you can cut out, which pisses me off because they did cut out a lot from the sequel, which I will talk about later. I want to get through initial reactions before I go into the behind the scenes. But I think both part 1 and part 2 don't really have any set structure. I was listening to the commentary just now before doing this video, just because I wanted to get some more information, get the final new supplement out of the way. Not out of the way, but experienced. And I was listening to it, and they talk about how... what the fuck was I talking about? Oh my god. I completely lost my train of thought. Oh my god. Well, I guess I've forgotten it. It's very well paced, these movies. Yes, so they took out a lot of scenes in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And it is such a shame because all of them sounded really good. And it is kind of shocking because... Okay, I remember now what I was talking about. The structure of the movie. In the commentary, they were talking about how there isn't really an Act 1, Act 2, or Act 3. And I was thinking about that while watching the movie. I was kind of like, yeah, what is Act 1? Where does that take place? Where's Act 2? Where's Act 3? And so on. And Patrick Bromley, I believe his name is, the guy who did the new 2022 commentary track, he talks about how he sort of views Act 1 as up to the point of Caroline Williams leaving the radio station. We are introduced to our villains. We know Caroline Williams, or Stretch. We know Dennis Hopper's character, which I haven't even mentioned yet. He's great in this movie. Although, there's stuff to talk about later on that. But we are basically introduced to every major character at this point. And we are headed over now to kind of our bad place, or our terrible place, which is the underground system beneath Texas something Funland, or something like that. Some amusement park in Texas that they actually found. And they were able to build a set in a giant warehouse that made it look very close to that area, and were actually able to use some of the sets at the amusement park, such as at the end of the film where Caroline Williams and Bill Moseley are going up the staircase, the metal one. There's sort of that cliff face that they go up. That was an actual kind of prop in this place, and they were able to just add a few things there to make it look more Sawyer family-like, and they were able to sell it pretty easily, that, you know, this was a natural, an actual place, actually. And that really leads to my next point, and my final point about my initial reactions about why I love this movie so much, which is the set design. I love the radio station, first of all, just to give a kind of subversion. But I also really love, just like everybody else, and for very good reason, the labyrinth that the Sawyer family lives inside. It's 3 stories. The very tip-top layer is the above ground setting, which we see a little bit of when they first show up in the dark. And then we have Dennis Hopper attempting to save Caroline Williams, and she falls through that layer into the second story. And that is where sort of the main kind of trash deposits are, is kind of my interpretation of that second level, because the first level, the bottommost level, is where they actually collect all of the meat. They collect all of the food that they eventually make with the meat. That's where the furnace is, which is absolutely amazingly designed. It has skulls all over it. There's little mud plaster, maybe is what you would call it, kind of keeping all the skulls together in this giant like kiln, basically. You get the giant dinner table, which is very reminiscent of the original movie, which that's what Tobe Hooper planned on, and sort of based the entire movie on, was the original one, as everybody probably knows. Part 2 is basically part 1, from beginning to end. It's exactly the same movie. Just about. There's a few tweaks here and there in terms of character decisions, or theme, or just story beats in general. And the family dinner scene, I think, is a scene, especially in the original one, that I think about often, just in my day-to-day life. It is the most impactful, nasty, horrific, disgusting, every adjective you can think of that is meant to make you feel nasty and disgusting and needing to take a shower. That scene in the original one is an absolute nightmare. And the shooting conditions that they were shooting in for part 1 and especially part 2, I think they're both very terrible conditions they worked under. The legend, well, not legend, this happened. Basically, part 1, they made the movie in the summer, in July, I think, in Texas. It's very hot down in the south of the United States during July and during the summer months. In North Carolina, you have the humidity, which also really fucks up the temperature. And the temperatures during Texas Chainsaw reached up to 120 degrees in that tiny house that they were shooting in. And everybody was just sweaty, miserable, dehydrated. They had a whole lot of just dead carcasses around because somebody Tobe Hooper knew in the area was a cow farmer and was like, oh, hey, here, I have thousands of bones. Take it. And the set designer was like, okay, good. And then made the awesome house and the dinner scene. And they also had a lot of meat just laying around. And that stuff was melting and basically being cooked while they were filming the movie. And it became such a terrible kind of smell that because they filmed the movie over about 2-month period. I think they said 8 weeks. And Leatherface never changes costume. He wears the same clothes. And, if you don't know, this was an independent movie. They did not have major bucks back in this movie. So they only had one costume. And so Gunnar Hansen, the guy who played Leatherface, he had to withstand 120 degrees, by the way, which I can't even do that now. Even if you had no clothes on, you had fans all around you, everything, you would still feel absolutely terrible. Gunnar Hansen was an absolute pro and soldier because he wore that giant rubber mask during the entire shooting of it, wore the same suit and like heavy professional suit the entire shooting of it, where they were getting a lot of blood on it, a lot of guts, everything. And they didn't want to put it through the washer because they were afraid that it was going to be damaged and break down. And it ended up that they just never washed it. So for 8 weeks, he was just wearing the same thing over and over and over again, and got to the point where he was a mile away or so, or a couple 100 feet away, because it was absolutely terrible. Nobody could be around him. And so he talked about how it sort of became like a real situation, that family denizing that they were shooting, because they were all absolutely losing their minds. And they shot that scene for, I think they said 18 hours or something, 20 something hours, maybe 30 hours. So I remember it was more than 24. And I remember Gunnar Hansen and Jim Cito, basically everybody who was on set talked about just how awful it was. And I cannot imagine shooting under those conditions. And this is another reason why part 2 is so amazing, is that it was basically shot under the same exact conditions. And Tobe Hooper was like, I'm never doing this again. And that's why we have the ending of this movie, where basically everybody is killed. And if they are not killed, they are absolutely damaged and broken and will not be able to do much after the movie in terms of the end-world events going on. And they were also shooting part 2 in under or over 120-degree weather the entire time that they were shooting this movie. And there's a part in the movie where Dennis Hopper, the amazing late great Dennis Hopper, he gets down into the first floor, the bottom floor, and finds a leaking wall. And he busts it open, and gallons upon gallons upon gallons of blood and guts, actual blood and guts from cows from a nearby farm, explode out all over the floor. And you see Dennis Hopper about to throw up, and he says, "This is the devil's land," or whatever awesome line that he had. And it is absolutely shocking that nobody quit. Dennis Hopper has been noted and documented saying that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was the absolute worst shooting or movie that he ever shot. Which is so hard to believe for me. But I can't think of a worse movie to film in. This is a very great movie, of course. But to be an actor in Texas Chainsaw, I think I would hate it because of the grueling conditions everybody had to go through, which is sort of why Gunnar Hansen talks about how they all became sort of their own crazy family by the end of the shooting, because they were shooting under insane conditions the entire time. And it is kind of amazing, because if both of these movies, or even the original one, ended up being just terrible movies, and they went through all of that work and struggles and were able to make, that movie under such a low budget, and for it to end up like shit, that would have been the biggest tragedy. And I think, well, maybe not the biggest tragedy in movie history, but it would have been up there. It would have been probably as frustrating as thinking of a Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune, in my opinion. If these movies turned up like shit after all of that work, that would have been absolutely terrible, and I would have felt so bad for everybody involved. But that's sort of my initial reactions. I know we're about 30 minutes in, but one thing to note about this movie before we go into the special features is that this movie was part of a 3-picture deal, which I should have grabbed the movies off the shelf, but I didn't think of it. The first movie of it was, of course, Life Force, which is his space vampire movie that I actually really like. I need to rewatch it and kind of really engage with it. I didn't feel as engaged as I probably should have been when I was watching it during my first watch, I think a few months ago, maybe a year ago. But that was the first movie part of this deal with Canon Films, which I don't have much love for in terms of the behind the scenes because they're very sleazy. They let uh, a lot of terrible people get away with their crimes. Michael Winner, aka not to name anybody, but they also did Invaders from Mars as the second deal, and sort of the linchpin to this entire contract was that Tobe Hooper had to make a sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre because it would be a big moneymaker. By that point, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is basically a classic, regarded as one of the best horror films of all time. And so that's why they were like, okay, you gotta make a part two. And Tobe Hooper didn't want to. So he was like, all right, writer of the movie, oh my gosh, I should have wrote his name down, but the producer is a big deal. And he's also a writer. And he helped Tobe Hooper kind of develop an original idea for a sequel to Texas Chainsaw, which was to make it a comedy. This movie is fucking funny. And it is not insane to me, but a little bit is, that nobody really caught on to that. Roger Ebert hated this movie because of how funny it was. He thought it should have stayed about the same as the original. And I completely disagree, of course, because part two, what makes it so awesome is that it is funny. It's basically the same movie, but done in a totally different way. And it still has the very terrifying moments, which I think balance out the humor very well and becomes a very fun movie. And also a terrifying movie. I think both of those tones are so masterfully balanced that I wish I could go back in time and kind of tell Tobe Hooper, like, don't let people cut scenes out of the movie, first of all. Second of all, I don't know. I don't know what I would tell him, but I would try to maybe have the marketing material. Well, even the marketing material. This was the poster. It was a riff on the Breakfast Club. Like, I just... Maybe it is kind of insane to me that people hated this movie because of the humor. Or that they didn't see any humor. This is something that I haven't thought about too much, because I've been just thinking about all of the other stuff with the cast members and such, but it's just baffling to me that nobody kind of caught on to the fact that this was a comedy, and that Texas Chainsaw 1 is also a comedy. It's a much darker comedy, and a lot harder to kind of pick up on the comedic aspects of that story, because it is so terrifying. But I think part 1 is very funny if you have that state of mind on. But for me, when I wasn't listening to Tobe Hooper talk about, oh my gosh, this part's so funny, oh my gosh, Franklin, the guy in the wheelchair, oh my gosh, he is so fucking annoying, and he just gives this movie, like, just an air of annoyance for everybody involved. And they always, on the commentary, they were joking about just how annoying it was, where to the point where Franklin finally dies in that movie, and everybody's cheering because he's just constantly like, meh, meh, meh. And he's just like yelling at everybody. He's mean. Like, nobody likes him. And that's why Dennis Hopper's character is a lot of fun, because Dennis Hopper is the uncle of that Franklin character. And so his role in the movie was to kind of take vengeance upon the Sawyer family for killing Franklin, his nephew. And it is so fucking funny that Franklin is still around. I did not even notice that that was Franklin my first 2 watches, because my first watch, I watched it just on my own, no commentary, and the second watch, I watched it with the Hooper commentary track, which I guess it was my second watch I realized this. But Tobe Hooper was like, oh yeah, by the way, there's Franklin from the original movie. And I had no idea. I did not even register the original movie. I was just so focused on the sequel and making sure that I caught everything that I needed to on my first watch. And again, this movie feels like it's 30 minutes long. It is a very tight, very well paced movie. So once you start watching it, you just kind of have to watch the rest of it because it is so awesome. It just starts right off the bat so well. And yeah, giving my voice a little bit of a break, but we're going to talk about the special features now. And I'm mostly going to be talking about the highlights for me. Let me show you real quick how much text is on the back of this release, showing how many special features there are. That entire kind of giant paragraph between my two fingers there, those are all the special features. I did not watch all of them. It would take me far too long. And I gotta leave some surprises for everybody. But the highlights for me were the new interviews that they had on this release. The new commentary track was good. I really enjoyed it. It did not start off that well, in my opinion. It kind of starts off like, oh, I love this movie. I am part of this podcast. And you're kind of like, who is this guy? What accreditation does this guy have? Why should I care? And then he actually gets into the movie after the intro credits happen. And it's like, okay, yeah, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. He's great. And that was sort of one kind of hiccup for me on the commentary track. But the interviews, I think, are essential to watch if you don't want to watch through the paragraph of special features. Is the interview with Tom Savini, of course. When I saw that they had included a new release with him on this release, I was like, holy shit, Tom Savini interview? Yeah, give me that. And they also interviewed him for, what was it? The Incredible Melting Man? No. Mutant War? One of those really awful movies that I did not like. Well, oh my, I can't remember, but his interview on there is so fucking good. I highly recommend it. I've already sort of talked about what he talks about, but the big takeaway from that, which I haven't really talked about, I've been hinting at it, are the cut scenes of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. It is a crime to me that that material is absolutely lost. It is a tragedy, in my opinion. If you don't know, the original length for this movie was about an hour and 50 minutes. It was about 10 minutes longer. And Tom Savini, every movie he does, he always has a camera on him. He hires somebody to follow him around and just record. Record behind the scenes, record impressions, record thoughts, record them just doing the makeup on the actors, all of that. And there's a couple scenes that they show that Canon decided that they wanted to have the movie just about an hour and 40 minutes because if they put it down by 1 hour or by 10 minutes, they were able to squeeze in one more showing of this movie. Thus, on opening day, when everybody wants to watch it, that's another room of people that you can get extra money for. So they took all these different scenes that Tom Savini worked so hard on the makeup of, which one of them includes Joe Bob Briggs being murdered, and it also features a football team being murdered, and then an extended gore scene with the two yuppies in the beginning of the film. They took all of that out. They didn't tell anybody. They got the movie in hand, and as part of the deal, Tobe Hooper had to go make Invaders from Mars. Maybe the next movie after that, but he had no time, so he just handed it off to his editor. And the production company, Canon Films, walked in and was like, okay, you're taking this out, you're taking this out, you're taking this out. And they did not make copies of the movie. So all of that material is just gone. Fuck you, Canon. That is such a big loss to me as an appreciator of Tom Savini and Tobe Hooper. That is so fucked up that they would do that. And that wasn't the only thing either. They also, on this release, I didn't really include in my highlights, but they also interviewed the actor who played the sheriff, who talks to Dennis Hopper in the beginning of the movie. And he was talking about how during that scene that they were shooting, where Dennis Hopper is kind of scoping around the car crash area where the two yuppies had died, he meets the sheriff, and the sheriff is like, oh, stop investigating, you're crazy, there's no family of cannibals. And while they were shooting that scene, they were getting ready to shoot it, and Tobe Hooper kept being bothered by the studio to be like, hey, you're running out of time, you need to start doing more, like you need to make your movie shorter or something. And Tobe Hooper was like, okay, got it, like we'll get it done. And Tobe Hooper consistently gets it done. But in this case, some big guy, according to the sheriff, a guy who was 6'8" or something, in a full suit, very expensive suit with like leather boots, he shows up. He just grabs the script out of like Dennis Hopper's hand or Tobe Hooper's hand, somebody's hands, and just opens up to a random like 6 pages and just rips them out. Screenwriting advice, from what I've heard, is that every page should be about a minute of screen time or something like that. So you want 100 pages for about an hour and 40-minute movie. And so for this movie, this guy just ripped out 6 minutes worth of footage and said, okay, you're on schedule now. And then just drove away. And nobody could do anything because studio. They're paying you to make the movie. They'll just stop, the production if you don't follow them. And so it was just really fucked up hearing that. And I was so sort of grieved by the fact that we have all these Tom Savini shots that are lost. All these Tobe Hooper shots that are lost. Individually, that's a tragedy. Losing Hooper shots or Tom Savini shots. But to lose shots that were done by Tobe Hooper that show Tom Savini makeup with very bloody scenes, which one of them shows, I think, Leatherface bisecting somebody with a chainsaw. So you see the body like split open and you see the insides. Like it was going to be really fucking disgusting and would have made this movie not so much better, but it would have just made the movie so much more effective, in my opinion. Because we really only have the one major blood scene in the beginning of the film where the yuppie's head is split in half and it's just kind of like hanging there, that side of the head. And it is so frustrating to me that they took all that out. But they show a lot of those scenes from somebody across the studio with a camcorder, basically, shooting that scene. And it's a tragedy. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. But another great interview that is on this release is one of Bill Johnson. He is the guy who plays Leatherface in this film, and not Gunnar Hansen. Gunnar Hansen was not involved with this movie because they were like, hey, we're going to pay you on scale, which means that they make a certain percentage of the movie's earnings. Gunnar Hansen was like, it's not enough. Like, I got paid nothing for the original one, which was a whole shit show to begin with. If you don't know about that, basically what they did is that they were like, oh yeah, each actor makes, 5 to 10% of the theater earnings. And they were like, oh, great, like, we're going to be superstars once they started getting the ratings in and how just kind of effective the original was. And when they got the paycheck, it was $6. Gunnar Hansen talks about in the original special features. And it's like, how the fuck did that happen? Like, how did anybody be able to do that? And it ends up that the company that was representing them did not not told them that that company was one of like 8 different companies that had money in the movie, or who had a certain percentage. And so in actuality, they had like 10% of the earnings from Texas Chainsaw. And then the actors only had 5% of that. And so at the end of the day, they only made like, well, it wasn't 5 to 10%. That's a lot. It was maybe like 0.1%, maybe. Uh, they ended up only making like $6, Gunnar Hansen says. And it is absolutely mind-boggling that they would do that. And they tried to go to court with it, but they knew they wouldn't win. So they were like, guess I'll just never do a movie again. Because that was like the biggest horror movie ever. And they only got paid $6 for it. So that's kind of why you see them in the horror conventions a lot. At least the ones who are still alive. I think Gunnar Hansen passed away a couple years ago. Tobe Hooper did. That was a big shame. I remember that happening. I think I just picked up Texas Chainsaw for the first time. Now, of course, I've seen Poltergeist a million times. I have the 4K over there, just coming from the mail. But the Bill Johnson interview is absolutely funny. I think he is the kindest man in the world. He is so funny. Everything he does, he's very articulate in terms of his speaking, but he's also very uncle-like. I don't know how to describe him. He's like that really fun uncle who is just so funny and has so many little quippy voices that he uses, because Bill Johnson is like, he's just talking about the movie. Oh yeah, I was in this movie. And he'll be like, okay, and then Tobe Hooper turned to me and he will like imitate Tobe Hooper. And he would also imitate like everybody that he was talking about. So you have him just having so much fun, and you can hear the Vinegar Syndrome guy in the back laughing at times. And they just let it go on, and Bill Johnson's laughing too, and then they cut, and then back to the interview. I really love that interview. I kind of want to watch it again after this. But it was just so funny to watch him kind of have fun, basically. And I also highly recommend the Caroline Williams interview. All 3 of them, the one with Tom Savini, Bill Johnson, and her, they're all newly shot earlier this year. And she is very fun to listen to also. But in terms of being informative, because she talks about how impactful this movie was to her life, and how, although she didn't really do many other horror films after this, she became a scream queen because she's screaming through most of this movie. And she talks about how, she was a very small time actor in Texas, had auditioned for this movie, and got it. And she's one of 2 actresses in this movie. There are like no women in this movie. And that is something that the commentary talks about, how this movie is definitely about toxic masculinity. And I'll go into that later, but there's a lot of references of sort of the idea of a man, and how there's the ideals of a man and the values of a man, and how everybody in this movie inhabits one negative aspect that you can find in toxic masculinity. And that is something that I knew of in the original one, but I never really delved deep with the sequel. And it totally made sense to me. I could definitely see it. I'll talk more about them as I talk about each character. I'm also talking about every character in this movie, because I really want to. I love this movie. I also listened to the commentary that has sort of all of the behind the scenes of this movie, as Tobe Hooper talks about it. And it's a pretty old one, early 2000s, maybe late 90s, I think, when they were releasing it on DVD, maybe early 2000s. And Hooper doesn't really go into the behind the kind of the negative aspects of the behind the scenes. Tom Savini, because I watched the interviews first and then that commentary one night, and I remember Tom Savini was like, "Here's every issue that they threw at us." Like, I'm talking shit about everybody in this movie, in this interview that was part of canon, and Tobe Hooper doesn't really talk about it at all, and it was kind of whiplash to me because you hear Tom Savini talk about it for like 40 minutes, I think, is the length of his interview. And I remember hearing him talk so negatively about the behind the scenes with the producers and the production company, everything. And then to go to Tobe Hooper, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we did the shot," and he's just not talking and just not ignoring it, but because he was still making a movie, he was talking about filming one movie that he was working uh, on the other side of town. And I remember that was just kind of a hole for me. It's a really great commentary, but that's kind of one thing that I kind of wish we could get is sort of his side of that story. Um, so yeah, that's it's a really great commentary. It's not a new one, of course, because Hooper's no longer with us. But it would have been great to get that, and I highly recommend the commentary. He talks with the director of the remake, which is a lot of fun because they talk about in the original special features, the making of for that movie. They talk about this remakes, and they have Tobe Hooper talking about the remakes, which was a lot of fun to listen to him talk about. But I also listened to the commentary with Patrick Bromley. Yes, Patrick Bromley. Uh, he is a filmmaker and podcaster, I believe, and a critic. This is a newly recorded earlier this year commentary where the main takeaway is how this movie sort of displays toxic masculinity, talks about how the Sawyer family are basically the ultimate capitalists because in the first movie, that family was marginalized as veterans and such. And they could only survive through murdering and eating stray tourists who nobody could find, and especially in the 70s, you probably wouldn't find anybody, and that's why you find, even to this day, oh, we found the bones of this victim, over here, 40 years later from, some Ted Bundy murder or something. And he also talks about how in the second movie, to contrast the themes of the original, they basically beaten the capitalists at their own game by literally grinding people and turning them into commodities to be sold. And how that's like the ultimate sustainable resource, basically. Because they are just able to get away with it. And that was something that was really kind of great about the commentary, and that's when I really became more interested in it. I always try to give the commentary at least 5 minutes before I give up on it. Now it's getting pretty close in the intro credits where he's introducing himself, which, I mean, in hindsight, okay, I kind of fucked up and not realizing, like, yeah, he probably should because he's not, the director or writer of it. But that was what I really enjoyed after the intro credits, was that immediately he was like, here's what I think the themes are. I'm going to give my justifications for my thinking behind that. And I totally see what he means. And some of it I now consider canon to my understanding of the film. But Caroline Williams is sort of the first cast member I want to talk about. She plays Stretch. who is a really great character, and I absolutely love how capable she is. She's not just another damsel in distress. She saves herself. And this is sort of another thing about the themes of breaking down uh, masculinity and toxic masculinity is that every man who tries to save her ultimately fails or isn't really trying to save her. In the case of Dennis Hopper, he purposely sets her up as a trap, gets her friend LJ or yeah LJ LG. Ah, fuck. Okay, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they get Dennis Hopper's character is on a vengeance quest, and so he doesn't really care all that much about Caroline Williams. He knows that she's part of a radio broadcast station, so he's like, "Hey, here's a tape I found from the yuppie victims. I think it's the oh no, she says that to Dennis Hopper, and Dennis Hopper is like, "Hey, play that tape on your radio station." And that's the tape of them being murdered by Bill Moseley's character, which we don't actually see on camera. And also, I think Leatherface is there too. And she is just absolutely amazing in this movie. Again, very capable. And her interview, again, just talks about her experiences on the movie, how she became an actress, how her career has been impacted by this movie and the fan sort of reaction, and how she goes to a con and she's really only known as Stretch. People say, "Hey, Stretch," and she's just very great in that role. And I really love Marilyn Burns' character in the original one, but I think Caroline Williams really brings her charm because she's not just being chased around the entire movie. She follows the Sawyer family to the hideout that they have. And Dennis Hopper shows up and accidentally has her fall through the hole in the ground and then gets caught by Leatherface. Marilyn Burns, and this is more of just a consequence of the writing, she's a damsel in distress and is saved at the end of the movie by the truck driver. And at the end of part 2, Caroline Williams has killed Bill Moseley and is at the top of the theme park cliff thing, spinning around with a chainsaw. And it's awesome. And it's a really great sort of reversal of the original one, because that is sort of the attitude that Tobe Hooper was going into for part 2, because he didn't want to make part 2. He had no interest, and I don't blame him, but he really knocked it out of the park, and I think would have been even more out of the park if those few scenes were not erased out of the movie. 9 minutes or so of violence that Tom Savini did the makeup for. Would have been really amazing. But that's really all I had about Caroline Williams and Stretch's character. She's really great. Again, capability, resiliency, although it's pretty debatable, if not told outright, that Stretch has completely lost his sanity at the end of the movie. Marilyn Burns' character also does. At the end of that movie, she's just laughing. And she looks like totally crazy. Her eyes are bloodshot. She's totally dirty. And she's sobbing and also laughing hysterically. And this movie, she does the chainsaw dance that Leatherface does at the end of the original one. So it's a really great reversal. I really like her character in this movie. I love her introduction, too, where she's on the radio station and the yuppies call and she's like, get out of here, fuckos. Like, get a life and all that. And she hangs up on them. And then they call, and then the actually getting murdered, when in the original Call, they were pretending to be murdered and taunting her and being like, hey, I'm gonna fuck you, you know, yeah, 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 and all this stuff. And she's like, oh, get out of here, it's not real. And she can hear the chainsaws, and she's like, well, maybe it's not, you know, fake. Maybe this is bad. I'll record it and send it off to Dennis Hopper. And that's a really great intro. You get basically everything you need to know about Stretch in that short scene, the short 5-minute scene or so. Maybe it's actually 15 minutes and I just don't notice, but really great character. Next we have Dennis Hopper, who I've talked a lot about already, so this might be a shorter section than I think. But this movie was made in 1987. I don't know if I even mentioned that, but that was around the same year that Blue Velvet happened, which is a David Lynch film. I love it. It's one of my favorite David Lynch's. I think it's at number 5, I think, total. And there's only like one David Lynch movie I don't like. Dune, but that's mostly just for the kind of tamperings that the studio did on it in the last 30 minutes or so, the last act. But same year as Blue Velvet. And that movie that Dennis Hopper is in, he is an absolute genius. He's masterful. It's one of my favorite acting by him, outside of, say, Out of the Blue. That movie, I think he definitely was on drugs, but he came back from rehab because obviously he was a drug addict at the time and had many issues with alcohol too. I need to read and watch the documentaries and read the books on his life because I need to know more about him. But his character is looking for his nephew Franklin. I've talked about that. And on the commentary, the Patrick Bromwell one, or Bromley. I keep fucking up. I'm sorry. Patrick's commentary, he talks about how in the original one, Franklin was sort of Tobe Hooper's way to provide a commentary on the treatment of veterans after Vietnam, and how a lot of people, and this still happens today, would rather ignore them because they view them as burdens and annoyances and such, and so would just totally ignore them and keep driving, for example. And that's what Franklin's character was sort of supposed to represent, according to Tobe Hooper. And in part 2, Bill Moseley's character, who's the twin brother of Franklin, or no, of the stranger or hitchhiker, he's a Vietnam veteran, which is sort of why he wasn't around in the original movie. That's the justification. But he's a commentary on how veterans in the 1980s were viewed, which was that they had been ignored for so long that they've basically been forgotten, and people just don't even, I don't want to say know of their existence, but accepts their existence, because it means there's some failing on somebody's part. Most likely the community's fault in terms of, you know, just everything. So Dennis Hopper talks about how this was the worst movie that he had ever made. And I think because of the conditions, that's why he said it. The commentary track did not really extrapolate upon that point. But maybe I should have done some reading on that. But I have a 99% chance that I'm right, that it was the conditions. Because I'm sure he really liked Tobe Hooper. And the actor who played the sheriff, as part of the story that he talked about with the 6'8" guy with the suit tearing the script, you know, in half, or the pages that he wanted out to shorten the schedule. The sheriff actor talks about how Dennis Hopper, I'm sorry, I forgot his name. I want to make sure I was right. But he talked about how Dennis Hopper, because he was fresh out of rehab, like by a few weeks, maybe a month, and he talked about just how radiant that Dennis Hopper looked. He said that Dennis Hopper just looked absolutely amazing and was completely recovered, and that he had no interaction with Dennis Hopper because Dennis Hopper 99% of the time was by Tobe Hooper's side. Uh, when they were winding down at night and everyone was having a beer. And he talks about how there was one night where Tobe Hooper was not nearby, so Dennis Hopper came down to hang out with the other staff, or the crew members, and he sat down with the sheriff guy and was talking and was like, oh my gosh, like, I loved Easy Rider, and, you know, you really inspired me to be an actor, so on and so forth. And Dennis Hopper was, like, super chill and insightful and said that, you know, he never really had much to say, but when he had something to say, it was very powerful, which those are my favorite type of people to just listen to. And he talks about how, you know, Dennis Hopper would always be with Tobe Hooper. And while he was talking about that, in my head, I was like, oh my God, I would love to be a fly on the wall listening to Tobe Hooper and Dennis Hopper talking to each other. That would be like my death wish, or my genie bottle wish. If I had three wishes to make, one of them would be I would like to somehow witness every interaction that Dennis Hopper had with Tobe Hooper. Because I think two of them in a room would produce so many great stories and great anecdotes and just a lot of great knowledge and lessons to be learned. Especially Dennis Hopper. I think he is one of the best directors and actors around, especially in the last 20 years. And it is such a shame that he died, I think, in 2013, I believe. I vaguely remember when Dennis Hopper died. It was kind of sad. Because I had seen Easy Rider many years ago, and that was the movie that got me kind of knowing about Dennis Hopper, aside from Land of the Dead, which I don't want to say that movie's worse in terms, or that like it is of any less value than Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, but I'm kind of surprised that he didn't think that movie was bad to shoot or whatever. As somebody who I don't think has any positive feelings on CGI and such, because a lot of the backgrounds were done in that way, I believe. I don't know. I'm getting way off track. I apologize. But I've already talked about sort of the filming conditions, so that's one thing I wanted to talk about in this section, but I already talked about. I also talked about how he busted open the wall and all those cooked guts just fell out, and it was disgusting. One thing that the audio commentary said about Dennis Hopper's character that I thought was really great was that his character's name is Lefty. Lefty. A lot of people say that now as a sort of derogatory term for liberals. And the commentary talker was talking about how he had a feeling that Dennis Hopper's character was sort of reflective of Tobe Hooper's kind of attitudes around this time in the mid to late 80s. And that there's a line in the movie where he talks about, you know, burn it all down, and he's cutting down all the support systems for the village or whatever labyrinth that they've made underground. And he's cutting them all. He's like, burn it all down, kill them all, you know, this, that, and the other. And the commentary guy predicted that he's somebody who represents Tobe Hooper, as I've said, and how he wants to tear everything down that the Sawyer family has done, such as being the very successful capitalists, and also sort of the notions of family values, which is that they all use chainsaws to cut people up and cook them and eat them and so on and so forth. But The next character that I want to talk about, there's still a lot of notes left, but I'll try to go a little faster now. Is that we have the brother character in this movie who is more the cook in this movie, played by Jim Cito. Absolutely amazing guy. I think he is my favorite part of this movie when comparing to the original one in terms of like what do I think of his character in the original and his character in the new one, or Leatherface's character in the original and the new one. Again, I vastly prefer the original Leatherface, but in this one, I really love uh, the sequel's imagining of Jim Cito's character because he's so lovable. Again, he is sort of like the nice looking old man, like grandfather type. And he's at the hot dog competition holding up his little trophy. And he's like, oh my gosh, like, I'm so happy to be here. Everybody's so lovely. And then he leaves and he's like, haha, we cooked up another first place winner by cooking people and killing them. Oh my gosh, my sons are calling. Never call me on the cell phone, you fucker. And, you know, this, that, and the other. And it's just so, he's accepted now that the urge of becoming a murderer and a monster and all that. And in my opinion, he did not age a day between the original one and the sequel. He looks so good in the new one. And as an actor, he only really ever did Tobe Hooper movies. He did the original one, the sequel, and then a TV episode from the late 90s, I believe, maybe early 90s. But another great actor in this movie is Bill Moseley, who plays Chop Top. And he plays the twin brother of the hitchhiker character from the original one. I've already talked about that. And what's funny, which I never knew this until the commentary track of the new one by Patrick Bromley, he says that the corpse that Chop Top plays with and plays like puppeteer with is actually the corpse of the twin brother from the original one. And they call him now Nubbins. I love that. I had no idea about that in the 2 watches I did. And Tobe Hooper doesn't mention it. And if he did, I did not notice, and I must have been writing something down for this episode. But I think he's the biggest hole on this release of this Vinegar Syndrome release because he is not interviewed at all. He's still around. I mean, he's young. He's in his, I think, 50s maybe. Late 50s, but I guess he's in his 60s maybe. But I saw a tweet around the time when this release came out before it got shipped over to me that Bill Moseley was asked by somebody like, hey, like, why didn't you get interviewed for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 release from Vinegar Syndrome? And Bill Moseley was just like, yeah, I wasn't asked to. And I would just love to know why, personally. I think it's a big hole in this movie because his character of Chop Top is so creepy. And he's also very humorous. He's definitely the character that brings a lot of the humor to the movie. I think the cook brings some humor. The entire romance between Stretch and Leatherface is very funny to me. It's very macabre, very dark. But I really love his character in this movie. And there is a commentary track on this release that I did not listen to. I should have, but I think I had enough information now. We're at an hour and 17 minutes talking about one movie. But I'm sure that commentary is great. That's really the only special features with him, though. But he got hired for this movie because somebody handed Tobe Hooper, I think it was the writer for the movie, he handed Tobe Hooper a VHS tape, I think it's VHS, tape to Tobe Hooper for a fan film called Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And Bill Moseley made it himself and had graduated Yale and wanted to become an actor, so on and so forth. And so he made the short film where he basically plays uh, the hitchhiker character. And Tobe Hooper loved it so much, he was like, get me that guy. Like, we have to get him in the script. I think it was when they were filming the movie Life Force that the writer came up and was like, hey, have you seen this movie? Like, it's awesome. And I haven't seen it yet, but they showed clips of it on the Vinegar Syndrome release during the making of documentary, which I highly recommend, of course, which I didn't really talk about. I apologize. But it seemed pretty funny to me. He plays a really funny character throughout that little fan film. But there's a part in the movie where, well, there's multiple parts where you see him have a hot coat hanger and he lights it on fire and makes it really hot and he scratches his metal plate. Apparently, he does that not only to self-cannibalize himself because he eats the burnt flesh. There's apparently a spot under his metal plate, and Tobe Hooper talked about this, where if he touches it with the hot metal, he can give himself an instant orgasm. And so there's like a sexual nature to that, which makes sense because sex is also a theme throughout this movie with, Bill Moseley's character, as I said, giving himself orgasms on his head. There's also the cook, who is played by Jim Cito. He is fully no sex, no sexual anything. He represents that traditional family value of, don't talk about sex, don't do sex. If you do it, you're going to get pregnant and you're going to go to hell, especially if you're not married, so on and so forth. And then we have Leatherface, who is having basically his coming of age story, which I'm talking more about him right now, but Leatherface, he is coming of age. You see him flirting a lot more with Caroline Williams throughout the movie. And there's a very explicit scene in the beginning when he first meets Caroline where he's rubbing his chainsaw, his big metal chainsaw, against Caroline's legs and then starts like touching the inside of her legs with it. And she's saying, oh, do you feel good? Are you good? Like, am I making you angry? So on and so forth. And that was very explicitly done to kind of give Leatherface's character just another layer more to the kind of transformation from the original Leatherface to the new Leatherface. And I really love that. It's not something I thought about until Tobe Hooper was talking about it on the commentary track, but this is why I love listening to commentary tracks. The choice to have Chop Top be a Vietnam veteran was very explicitly done, as the commentary talks about, because Texas Chainsaw 2 kind of predates the kind of romanticization and commodification of Vietnam War movies, because after this you had Platoon, you had Apocalypse Now, you had a lot of movies, Hollywood movies, highly budgeted, major films with major actors and crews and all that. They started just capitalizing on the pain and suffering of that war. And they started making movies off of it and started making money off of it. And so Chop Top's entire desire to make an amusement park called Nam Land, like, it's very eerie to sort of think about, because a year later, maybe even the same year, there were major Vietnam base setting films going on, and it's just really eerie to think about. But I got just a few more notes left. Let's see if I can do it, but before an hour and a half. Leatherface, not as big of a villain, I feel like. Maybe just because we have the Hitchhiker in the original one and Leatherface. Those are really the only two that I'm afraid of. if I would ever meet them in real life. Grandpa, I'll just kick him over. He can't even hit people with the hammer, like, at all. But Leatherface, he was terrifying in the original one. In this one, he's a lot more layered and very interesting. And he's played by Bill Johnson this time. And I've already talked about the Gunnar Hansen stuff, about how he was only given like $6. And I've also talked about how Leatherface was basically a child in the original one. And just in terms of his mannerisms and his behavior. And in this movie, he's more like a teenager, which is really funny because he's having his coming of life or coming of age, and he's hitting puberty using his big giant phallus, the phallic symbol that is the chainsaw. He's using that to stroke Caroline Williams' thighs, and he flirts with her, and by the end of the movie, he thinks of her as a girlfriend, and she breaks up with him. Like, oh my god. I love Leatherface in this movie more, just watching him, but in terms of memory, well, not memory, but sort of lingering in my brain and ever looming, I think the original Leatherface is my preferred Leatherface. I love him in this one, though, for what Tobe Hooper was shooting for this movie, in terms of making a comedy and something that sort of dismantles, not the legacy, but the idea of the movie. And sort of like Gremlins 2, which I love. I love Gremlins 2. I might watch that tonight. And we also have Grandpa, who is the guy in the wheelchair, and we also have Grandma, but Grandma is in the movie for like a minute. She's great. I love her makeup, even though it's very obvious how they just kind of threw it together in the last minute, because they released the movie in theaters 8 weeks later, so not even a month or two. It's kind of shocking. But Grandpa is played by Ken Everett, who was somebody that the commentary by Tobe Hooper described as somebody who just looked gaunt. They had the sunken in eye lids. They had the sort of just like a sick look to them, and not in a bad way either. But the mask for Grandpa was done by Tom Savini, obviously. Tom Savini is the master. And Gabe Bartalos, who directed fucking Saint Bernard, but also did the makeup for this movie with Tom Savini, and also in Dawn of the Dead, I believe, and Day of the Dead, I believe he was involved. But Tom Savini, I think I've already mentioned this, specifically asked Tobe Hooper to do a severe close-up on that mask, because they worked so fucking hard, and it looks so natural. It is disgusting. The eyes look a little weird, but I think everything else on the mask just looks so fucking well done. It's so creepy. And I think his character is much funnier in the new one than the original. The original one, he's just kind of creepy because he just can't hit Marilyn Burns with the hammer. But in this one, he's like doing exactly the same thing. Missing. And he hits her once and he's like, yeah. And he starts laughing and he's getting like blood of her on his lips and licking it. And then Bill Moseley's like sticking the coat hanger. He's sucking on the coat hanger. Very sexual. Sex is a consistent visual. There's a lot of sexual images throughout this film. But that close-up did so much justice for the mask. I love it. I've already talked about the often repeated theme throughout Tobe Hooper's works, which is the bad place, which is the descent into madness that happens in a space that is adjacent, or at least underneath, kind of the main setting of the film. And that is when the madness occurs. And the madness in this movie is not as mad as the original one, in my opinion. Mostly because of the hitchhiker character. He is... I think they got a real serial killer cannibal off of the back deserts of I don't know, the Sahara, not the Sahara, but um, so, somewhere where the hills have eyes uh, happened in that movie. I think that character is just so fucking creepy. And I think he ramps it up to a level of real that I'm not comfortable with. And also because of the just how much more natural the movie looks because of the camera that it was shot on and how just grainy and kind of home video like that the original feels like. The new one is a lot more polished, in my opinion. Some, at least the dinner scene. But God, my voice is absolutely shot. I am, I think, done talking about this. My voice is now going away. Thank you all so much for watching this very long video. I'm going to try and finish the rest of the releases by the end of the week. I have 3 other movies, I believe, one of which is a double feature. But yeah, this was so much fun to talk about. I'm really happy to have finally seen this. I think this is my favorite release of the year. I don't even think it's a question whether I would buy this movie or not if I did not have the subscription. Yes, I would have fucking bought it. Thank you all so much for watching, and please have a great rest of the night.